everybody. Welcome to the 61st episode of the Manor Podcast. I'm your co-host, Roger Bodee, joined as always with my best friend and other co-host, Michael Hamilton. Michael, have you gone on any long walks or bike rides lately in mountainous areas?
In mountainous areas? I have been getting
Yeah.
outside a little more recently. Do I look like sunburn or something?
No, I just think that because you haven't won anything since February, it's pretty easy to make the argument that you're over the hill at this point, so...
We should do an outro with all the takes of how many times you burned me since not winning something since February. Wow.
Yeah, this is our third time recording this opening, and I've had to come up with more and more unique metaphors for saying that Michael sucks at Flesh and Blood because he hasn't won anything in 5 months.
Wow.
Even though I've never won anything ever, so who am I to say? But subtly, if you want to know the honest truth of what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to needle him to motivate him to start taking Flesh and Blood more seriously again, because he hasn't had the same hunger. He's not putting in the same tenacity like he used to before. He had something to prove and a chip on his shoulder, but now I got to make sure that I gotta like that fire in him.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like the fire's been lit? It's our logo.
Oh yeah, I feel the burn.
Good. I'm happy. If you ever need me to insult you more, buddy, let me know, and I'll be happy to do so.
I think I'm good. I think it's not the best form of motivation for me, believe it or not.
I'll keep that in mind. So what do you want to talk about today for real, buddy?
So there was a big battle-hardened release weekend in Cincinnati last weekend, and we both played in it. Neither of us did amazing, though I think we both learned some things and had some good takeaways. And then kind of want to just talk about what the meta is looking like, what some of the decks that did well, to kind of go through the top 8 and talk about the decks that people brought and did well with. And we also want to try something a little bit different this episode, where we've kind of, in the past when we're talking about specific deck lists, we've tried reading the whole deck list through, and I've gotten some feedback that might be a little difficult to follow just when you're verbally reading an entire deck list. It can be hard to follow. So instead, we're going to say whose deck it is and what they're playing, and then we'll kind of point out some key cards in their deck that might be either different from the norm or different from what you'd expect, or just kind of talk about the decks more generally and not go through every card.
Yeah, for sure. So do you want to start with, I don't know if you've ever heard of this hero before, but it won the tournament. Iyslander. Have you ever, I think it's pronounced Iyslander. Do you want to talk about this hero? Do you think you know very much about this hero or have any experience with them?
No, I don't know anything about Iyslander, but we could talk about
it. Okay, fair enough. We could speculate.
Yeah. So Rhea, I believe that's how you pronounce her name. Rhea Adams took down the Battle Hardened with an Iyslander deck. It's kind of looks about what you'd expect from an Iyslander deck. Outside of the attack action suite is a little bit different. There's 3 red Finals Fighting Spirit, which is probably the best attack in Iyslander. It makes sense to max out on that one. And then 3 red Raging Onslaughts, which that's not a card that has seen, I don't think, at least I haven't seen it in an Iyslander deck before. How about you?
No, not my time. That's for sure.
I guess it's not true. I've seen it in a commoner Iyslander deck before, but not a classic construction.
Fair enough.
So I think this card,
I guess Aether Ice Vein is a common. That's a pretty good common.
Aether Ice Vein is a very good common. So I guess Raging Onslaught, what it does is it blocks for 3, which is more than Wounded Bull blocks for, and that's the advantage of playing it over Wounded Bull. And then compared to Enlightened Strike, it's a popper for the Dromai. And I guess Prism matchup, if Prism is attacking you with Heralds and shows up, but the Dromai matchup is the one that matters a lot more. So having a 3-block popper, it's solid there. I think I'd still prefer Wounded Bull, but yeah.
I think Rhea said as much herself on her Discord, but it's close.
Right, preferring the 3 block on Raging Onslaught instead. And then
Plug for our Discord.
yeah. The other card that I think is new and interesting and exciting that's worth talking about is 3 copies of Warmonger's Diplomacy. And this card can be pretty powerful at the right moments, right?
Yeah, it definitely has its spots.
So
there are a non-zero amount of decks in the format that want to be playing both attack and non-attack actions on their turns.
Yeah, so I think this card's the standout generic Majestic from the previous set. It's a blue block 3, and it costs 0 and can have a huge impact on the game. So that's a great spot for your blue block 3 to be in. So slots in really well into Iyslander, and it also slots into a lot of other heroes that just have mostly one type of action they want to take, either attacks or non-attacks. And I kind of expect this will be like a staple of a decent amount of decks moving forward, Iyslander included.
For sure. As long as you are kind of not, if you're especially looking to like control the game on some kind of axes, it's a great card for doing that, for limiting these types of strategies that are trying to do things aside from just attacking or playing non-attacks. And obviously, if your deck is a little bit more linear, like if you're something like Bravo or Uzuri, I guess not Uzuri because she wants to play reactions, but
you can still play reactions. It stops either attack actions or non-attack actions. It only prevents you from taking actions. And yeah, so
I see. I played with this card. I don't even know what it does still. So that's how complicated and weird this card is, I guess. But sure, okay.
Yeah. So even if you choose peace, you can Voltaire with Lexi as well. Though that's a very strange play situation, I guess.
Interesting.
Because Voltaire is an instant. I guess the main one that matters is whether you choose war or peace, you can activate Waning Moon either way with Iyslander.
Okay. Good to know. Well, how are you activating Waning Moon if you haven't played a non-attack action?
Okay, if you choose war, you can't activate Waning Moon because you won't have played a non-attack action. That's fair. Because you will not
have forgotten everything about Iyslander.
But peace, if you choose peace, you can still activate your weapon. Though, if your weapon is an action, you cannot activate it if you choose peace.
Got it. Okay. And then I think the last notable thing about this deck, though, is like 3 red Winter's Bite. I know we were playing red Winter's Bite way back in the day, but it's interesting that the card is still sticking around, where I think in our builds past Indianapolis, we were kind of pretty happy to put that card to the side.
Yeah, honestly, I haven't played a ton of Iyslander post Indianapolis. We both played her at that the PTI event after the team sealed Battle Hardened in Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
And neither of us played Winter's Bite in that deck. But I think the card is just like, it's fine. It's a nice card.
Yeah.
It trades for a card. It's fine. Has go again. Doesn't cost your action point, and it doesn't get Codex back, notably. So it's a
very
real
important.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else you want to say about this list overall? Any other notable inclusions or not inclusions?
I guess the hat slot, when I was playing Iyslander, I was playing Crown of Providence, Coronet Peak, and Nulvern Hood. But Oldheim's gone, and that was the main matchup you wanted Crown of Providence for. And Wizards are not very common. I think we saw 2 Icelanders and 1 Kano in the tournament last weekend. So it's pretty easy to trim on Arcane Barrier when the Wizards are not around. Though with Iyslander winning a Battle Hardened, I kind of expect her to see a bit of a surge in popularity. People love Iyslander.
Yeah.
Some people, I don't know who, would like that hero.
So speaking of trimming Arcane Barrier, do you want to talk about the second place list then? This Nathaniel's Lexi deck?
Yeah, Nathaniel Snyder got second place with Lexi Livewire. He had 0 Arcane Barrier in his whole deck.
Yeah, but there's only 3 wizards in the tournament. You know, Michael, what are the odds you're going to run into a wizard? 3%? That's not very likely.
Yeah, so that's kind of a gamble you can definitely take if you think that the Wizards won't do well. You think other people will bring Arcane Barrier and tech for Wizards, then you can kind of tech for the other decks that you think will beat up the Wizards for you. But it's a risk that clearly did not pay off here, where Nathaniel went undefeated in the Swiss, though he conceded the last round after, I believe I heard that they played it out, and then after he won, he conceded to Pat Eshke to put him in the finals or into the top 8. But anyway, regardless, he went undefeated in the Swiss, won his first 2 rounds of top 8, and then in the finals met Iyslander with 0 arcane barrier and kind of just got punished, maximum punished, the finals of a tournament where first place, the reward is significantly better than second place at Battle Hardened.
Yeah, I mean, nobody gets a gold cold foil for second, so that's definitely true.
Yeah, but his Lexi list, I would kind of describe it as pretty close to.
That's not true. There's some spicy tech in here, Michael. What do you,
I'm missing it. I
there's
see
a
one
down
lightning.
and dirty.
Okay.
A down and dirty is pretty spicy tech for the Dromai matchup. We got 1 lightning surge, which is pretty clean. If you're getting a card back with Codex of Frailty, it's nice that you can get a 4-powered attack with Go again if that's what you want, as opposed to
always getting Falcon Wing.
Yeah, that only has 3. Then we got some Sleep Darts. That's a card that's been in and out of lists for a while, but it kind of makes sense that, if you're expecting some Levias to be popping up now in the aftermath of Dusk Till Dawn, Sleep Dart is a pretty impactful card against that hero or the demi heroes in either case.
Yes, Sleep Dart hitting Levia with like 5 or 6 blood debt is extremely threatening. That's just she can't turn it off anymore. So
yeah, and there's only 1 husk, and then if you're kind of like looping these with a Codex or something like that, then it can be pretty difficult for her to kind of like play around this effect, especially in the end game. So I think it's a solid include for that matchup. And then last, I think there's some premeditates, 2 red premeditates and 1 lightning. Oh, I already talked about lightning surge. I thought it was lightning press for a second. 2 premeditates, which Lexi kind of playing a little bit more pumps in her list now that she doesn't always have the bullseye bracers to be as arrow dense as she was before.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything to say about anything about that?
So I'm not on it today. I think that the premeditates are just a good inclusion. If you're not on Codex of Inertia or any of the other codexes, then you have space to have more than just the 3 Codex of Frailty as ponder creation effects. And Premeditate is just a very good card, and not surprising to see it slot into the Lexi deck here, especially a Lexi deck that's not playing any copies of Icequake. I think those cards kind of take competing slots, and Nathaniel choosing to go with Premeditate instead. The other thing to note is there's 10 ice cards here with 8 Winter's Bites and 2 Arctic Incarceration. I think that's a pretty common package. The Winter's Bites and the Arctic give you a lot of equity against these aggressive decks that are looking to play very red line, and you can really kind of punish them by giving them a Frostbite on quite a few turns and also stripping extra cards from them on top of having your threatening on-hit arrows.
So there's 3 copies of Hamstring Shot floating around here as well. Do you think that's enough ice cards to potentially go with Blizzard Bolt instead of just taxing the first effect, but actually just giving them a true Frostbite, and then potentially multiple Frostbites depending on how many arrows hit on the turn?
I think I prefer Hamstring Shot to Blizzard Bolt, because the times that you really want to make sure that you're taxing them are when you don't have the ice card. So Blizzard Bolt can kind of lead to situations where you're stacking Frostbites, and then the times that you don't have an ice card, you're like, man, I wish this Blizzard Bolt tax them because I don't have any other ways to tax them. So I do think I like Hamstring Shot better. I also think that the Ice Vein, what's the arrow Ice Vein called? Chilling Ice Vein?
Mm-hmm.
I also think that card's a little bit better than Blizzard Bolt, because causing them to pay the resource on your turn is a lot more likely to take a full card than just giving them a Frostbite and making their thing cost 1 more on their turn, where they could like pitch a blue to play something that costs 2 without having to give up a whole extra card.
Okay, fair enough. So ultimately, I think if there's 1 card added to this list, Nathan probably wins the tournament, and all he has to do is put 1 trench of the sunken whatever right? That's what that card is.
Trench of Second Treasure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because ultimately what that card does, first and foremost, as AB1, clean slot for an AB1 in the list. And kind of what Icelander's looking to do, and we saw it happen with like the Warmonger's recital, because also against Lexi as well, if Lexi has a face down card in her arsenal, she can't choose peace. If she chooses peace, then she can use her hero ability to flip the card up um, in order to like have the second arsenal slot available. But then she's on peace and can't attack with any arrows. And if she chooses attacks and there's a non-attack face down, then she's just stuck entirely. So that's kind of why that awkwardness lines up. But when you have Trench, you can kind of just use that to put your face down card at the bottom of your deck, get a clean resource off of it, and then not really have to worry about what's going on with the Warmonger's recital anymore. And you're just kind of pretty free to just choose war way more often. So I think if there's just like one card that need to be slotted in to like save the matchup, and you kind of talked about this too in our tier list videos, where if Lexi's just slot one or two cards in, whether it's that or Heart of Ice, then like the Wizards have a way harder matchup into Lexi, and it kind of just fixes it overall. And I think that's just going to be the case going forward, where it's going to be, well, I just need one slot, and it goes from making the Iyslander matchup really bad to just like heavily favored. That seems like worth one slot.
Yeah, I think so too. It isn't surprising to see kind of trimming on Wizard hate for this first week tournament, where I really didn't think Wizards were in a good spot. I think a lot of the community shared that sentiment, where Wizards didn't seem like it was their time to shine. But whenever that happens and everyone's like, I'm going to play 0 AB, play maybe 1 AB, then that's when they show up and when they can take down tournaments. And Icelander's still pretty good against the Runeblades, so if the non-Runeblade heroes are not playing AB, then that gives you a lot of equity.
I feel like somebody really smart and wise put Wizards not in C tier, because if they're not respected and people trim on AB, they can just randomly snipe a tournament. I feel like somebody said that a week ago. Who could have done that?
Yeah, I guess like I think C tier heroes are definitely capable of winning tournaments, especially if your opponents don't have any cards that are good against you or any practice in the matchup. I shouldn't say any practice in the matchup, but like I think if you aren't going to tech for it and you have a lot of inexperience in the matchup, C tier heroes are very capable of winning events.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to go as far as to say Nathan's inexperienced. I'm not going to talk to his experience level overall as a player. He could be a wonderfully experienced player in Iyslander, but when you don't have AB, you're kind of putting yourself in a hole. And that's kind of what I was just talking about, where people don't respect them. It's like that. It's like a paradox where, like, if you don't respect them, then they're good, but as soon as you start respecting them, then they're bad. And also, like I alluded to earlier, though, like if you just need one slot in your deck to just kind of not have to worry about it, just like find the slot, like it's one slot, like especially when you start going to like callings or bigger events like pro tours, because like there's going to be like the 5 or 6 Kano players who are just the Kano masters out there floating around. Like you might as well respect it.
It also is kind of difficult to be experienced against Warmonger's diplomacy at this point. The card's been out had been out for like one day when the tournament started, so it had been spoiled for a week. But
sure, but do you think that one card radically fundamentally changes the play pattern and archetype that is Iyslander, to just completely throw out and invalidate all of his experience?
I I wouldn't say that, and we might get into it in a university video at some point. But there was a turn where choosing war off Warmonger's diplomacy really did hurt him, when he could have he could have chosen peace and flipped up a card in his arsenal face up.
Yeah, for sure. That makes sense. Okay, do you want to talk about, or do you have anything else to say about Lexi before we move on, I guess?
She's still good. She's still very, 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 very good.
True. Okay, do you want to talk about the unplayable hero by this incredibly mediocre player named Mara Ferris?
Okay. I don't agree with those things that you just said. Mara Ferris has been consistently doing very well with Dromai, and Yeah, so someone put Dromai in S tier because Dromai is still very good. Not as good as Lexi, but still quite good.
I put her
It,
in A tier. Come on. Come on. I've gave her a little
so,
respect.
so Mara top forward the ProQuest with Dromai. It's very, very similar to the deck that she took to PT3 with a couple key exceptions. One, she's trimmed a few blues down, just down to just the 3 copies of Passing Mirage that she boards in against some decks. So the Iyslander versus Dromai matchup has traditionally been very, very Dromai favored, but with 3 blues, Iyslander is looking like she has a chance finally. um, the other thing is there's 2 copies of the new defense reaction flicker trick that lines up very well against Lexi's 1 for 5 arrows when Lexi's like a lot of the time Lexi wants to sequence her arrows 1 for 5 with go again into 0 for 4 that she chooses +1 on the Voltaire. So flicker trick can cleanly cover up either of those, and you are scared of lightning press or rain razors blowing you out, but there's a lot of times that you can line it up that won't happen. And when you don't, just a 1 card clean block on a card that costs Lexi 2 resources to load and fire and a whole card, you're trading up significantly on that exchange. Additionally, there are a lot of the time it would cost you 2 cards to block that out or a card plus an equipment. So being able to block it out with 1 card is very good. And there are other ways you can play around the pump spells from Lexi. Some of her 3 of a kind turns, you she can't play a pump spell in combat, so your flicker tricks are safe at that point. And then if you use it on the second arrow Lexi fires in a turn, she's almost never going to have the rain razors, because if she's firing 2 or 3 arrows and she wanted to rain razors you, she probably plays it when she attacks with the first arrow. So it leads to some pretty interesting mind games. And when this card was spoiled, it was definitely in a spot where it's like, this card is good if people are playing 5 power attacks with meaningful on hits, and that's what Lexi's all about. So this card does line up very well into Lexi.
Yeah.
The,
And then do you want to, oh, yeah, I think you're about to get to it. The card that I said was the actual best new illusionist card they printed in this set, basically Thoughtseize. And we saw it do as much in the quarterfinals against Pat, Lost in Thought, where Mara played it at an interesting timing interval, and it made it so Pat just didn't have a functional turn, where he just spewed a card in Arsenal, 2 cards in hand, took a bunch of blood debt, and passed back because he just had no meaningful game actions to take. That seems like a pretty good card,
Yeah, so this is a card that's like really, really below rate. Spending a resource and a card to take one of their cards and give them a ponder token, that's like a horrible deal. You're giving them a
Oh
card
my
back, you're
god,
taking a card.
Michael.
But because of both the context of Dromai, where you really get a lot of value knowing what their hand is, being able to strip a popper is very powerful. And then also how some hands scale like exponentially based on a certain piece. Like it's not like every card always converts to 3 damage. Not everyone is playing Bravo with his Anathos that he's just going to turn every card into 3 damage by pitching 2 cards to play the Anathos, or pitching 3 cards to attack with a 8 or 9 or 10 power attack. A lot of decks need specific pieces to do their thing, and this is a card that it looked really good on coverage. If you go back and watch those games, Lost in Thought like kind of destroyed Pat. Kind of destroyed some of his hands, where he blocked with a yellow 1 turn, and then Lost in Thought took his blue, and then his hand was just 2 reds. And I don't think he was planning on getting that blue out of his hand. I think he was planning to keep it, but Lost in Thought just stripped the blue, and then he had 2 reds in hand and
But he got a ponder token, Michael. He
a
got a
card
ponder
arsenal
token.
that he wasn't able to use. So the Lost in Thought was very good there, and I think that's something that like will. I think it might even warp deck building to the point where you might want to shift some of your blues to be non-attack actions, so they're not vulnerable to be taken with Lost in Thought. When you're making blocking decisions, you have 2 blues and a red, or 2 blues and 2 reds. You might not want to block with that first blue, because if your other one gets Lost in Thought, then your turn falls apart. And this is going to be like this card is going to warp how people play the game, and I definitely underrated it when we were talking about the set.
Yeah, it's like looking at the original printing of Thoughtseize and being like, this card's so below rate. You have to pay 2 life and a card to take 1 card from your opponent. You're the one who paid the card and the 2 life to fall. That's 10% of your starting life total in Magic the Gathering. Why would you ever play this card? Like, and it can't take any card. It can only take non-land cards. You can't even take the most important thing in the game, Michael. Can't take the lands to strip them from cards. Why would you ever play that? Because the context around the card and making the decisions for your opponent to strip them of their agency in a game is incredibly powerful. And anybody who didn't see that on face value of this card when it was printed was, I guess, had never played with Thoughtseize in their life. But that's just me. I like hot takes and I like being right. So here we are.
Card's pretty good. Card's pretty good. It's not good in every matchup. Not good in every spot. There's times where the card is going.
Yeah, it's probably pretty bad against Iyslander and Kano. Like, sure.
Okay. Other than that, I think the deck is all things we've seen from Mara's Pro Tour deck.
And if we want to talk about, we're like angling this line a little bit. If we want to move on to Bravo next, if you don't have anything else to say, because little soapbox first. I got a draw against Dromai in my first round. I hate drawing. Drawing in the opening round of a tournament feels atrocious in a very long, grindy matchup. And if you have personal family emergencies, please step away from the table and handle them instead of being distracted in your game. But off my soapbox now. This card was cast against me. Austin thought it was cast against me as a Bravo player multiple times, and it wound up taking enough, like just an extra popper after presenting like other dragons or things like that on the turn cycle, and wound up pushing through a lot of damage. And I wasn't able to meaningfully use the ponder token. So I think even you said like it's not like, I think you said in your example of it's not good against Bravo. Even against Bravo, like just taking that extra popper out of their hand on a turn where you're looking to play Mirror Guys and Chromais and really starting to like push through your board that you built up, like the card does a phenomenal job of actually like stripping your opponent of those resources and the critical poppers, because not every hand is just always going to have 4 poppers. There's going to be some hands where you only have like 1 or 2 poppers, even a deck like Bravo, and being able to take away one of those and then power through the rest of your turn to push a bunch of damage is very powerful.
Yeah, maybe a better comparison is not everyone's Oldhim. Oldhim could really get 3 points of value out of most of his cards.
Sure, but like I think the exact same sentiment applies there, where Oldhim, not every Oldhim hand had 4 poppers. There's going to be the same circumstances where even against Oldhim, I think this card would have been pretty good.
All right. I guess the last thing about this deck too is Ashwings are very good. So I think like we kind of talked about it before with New Prism, like some decks just really struggle to deal with Ashwings. And before you could have your little auras that killed the Ashwings, and now that Prism has no way to kill Ashwings. A lot of decks really struggle into Ashwings, and I think that's why that's actually the real main reason why the ninjas and the rune blades are quite good against Dromai, is they have weapons that are presenting 1 or 2 damage, or in the case of Phi, they have Phoenix Flame that conveniently kills the Ashwings without wasting a bunch of damage, and other decks really struggle to do that.
Yeah, I think if you're playing New Prism and you're playing against Dromai and they cast Rake the Embers, the best game action to take is to pick up your cards and walk away from the table and just concede, because you just have no good, clean way to deal with those dragons. Like you either have to swing a whole Herald at them or use a whole card on them, and like there's no good answers. And the issue with those little Ashlings is each one of them is 1 point of damage, but they still pop your ward 4. They still pop whatever they want. They can still use the last one to be swung at a Spectre Aura. They're completely detrimental to everything you are trying to do on board. And the reason why that matchup used to be okay for Prism, it was close. Like I don't think one side was decidedly favored, but I like the matchup as old Prism, because you just got to play cards like the card that made 3 red spectral shield, or the card at red that made 3 spectral shields. I forget the name of it, but then you got to
procession.
Yeah, you got to use your spectral shields kind of as the checks on the Ashlings, and then they had their card that made the 3 resources, and then like you kind of got to contest the board with these kind of little 1 power attack game state actions, but you don't have those anymore. There's no more Luminaris, and even if you're playing an Iris build, you need 1 whole blue to swing 1 aura for 4 damage at an Ashling, and that's not getting it done either. So I think the Dromai V Prism is just so laughably one-sided in Dromai's favor that it's it might be one of the worst matchups ever in Flesh and Blood. I don't know.
One of the many things holding back New Prism from
Many,
glory.
many, many things.
Okay. Bravo.
Bravo time. So our teammate Ben Hannon, he's on the Wolfpack. Look at that guy go. Who knew?
Good
He's
job,
good at
Ben.
Flesh and Blood. So Ben and I played fairly different lists. Funny story, he played against Rhea in, I think it was the Swiss of the tournament, and Ben mentioned that he was on the Wolfpack, and Rhea assumed that since he was on the Wolfpack, he'd be on a similar list to I was, where I'm only playing AB1, and then so she took out all of her attack actions so he couldn't get value out of his Goliath gauntlets, only for Ben to flip up AB3.
Crater Fist.
Or Crater Fist, sorry. Block fire out of the Crater Fist, only for Ben to flip up AB3 and completely punish her for that decision. So just a small little amusing fact, I guess.
Yeah. That was a funny story, I guess. So I think the biggest change for Bravo from what we've seen in the past is 3 copies of Starstruck. This card is very good. It is 7 for 10, which not amazing on rate, but the crush effect where your opponent cannot play cards with power less than the damage dealt if it crushes, with less than or equal to the damage dealt if it crushes. That's very impactful. And the fact that it costs 7 lines up really well with Bravo's hero power. You pitch 3 blues to dominate and play Starstruck. And a lot of the time your opponent just won't have a turn after this against the aggro decks.
Yeah, it's exactly what he needed. Just kind of a flexible card to blocks well. That gives him the Seismic Surge token that helps him get to some of the breakpoints. Either pitch a blue for one of his 4s, pitch 2 blues for one of his 7s. Obviously, like you just said, has the really impactful on hit, and a yellow resource card isn't the worst thing in the world for Bravo. There's a lot of hands that kind of can use those 2 resources like very functionally well. Especially when you're playing cards like Rouse the Ancients and Pummel in your list. There's just a lot of clean interactions that happen with it. So I was very happy with it. I think it's just exactly what he needed to kind of push him up to that next level, kind of like what I was saying. And I think it'll stick around for as long as Bravo's around.
Yeah, I think if Bravo ends up being better than B tier, which is where I rated him, it's because how much this card changes his deck. Because without this card, it wasn't very good.
Sure. Yeah.
But it does change a lot.
That and the 1-2 punch of getting Warmonger's Diplomacy himself. Like that card, I don't see it in Ben's list, which is interesting because he's the person who talked me into playing Warmonger's Diplomacy. Ben was psyopsing me the whole time. Anyways, that being a 1 card disruption that he gets access to as well at generic is pretty good for him, especially since it's just a blue 3 block at Explorer.
Yeah, blue 3 blocks with very high upside are very good.
You know, it's not a blue 3 block that's in the deck though. What is this do? Get this, clean your list up, Ben. You would have won the tournament with a cleaner list. This blue pommel, man. Come on.
So I think the thinking here is a lot of the time when you're playing Bravo, you will have a turn where you strip your opponent's hand and they do essentially nothing. Whether it's because you dominated a Starstruck, you dominated a, oh gosh, what's the big one called? Crippling Crush, you dominated a Spinal Crush, and then you draw your hand back up and you draw a bunch of blues. When you're drawing a bunch of blues, you'd really prefer one of them as Pummel a lot of the time. And it doesn't swing the Anathos or the Titan's Fist particularly well, but when you're playing attacks, it's good. Or it's just as good as any other blue. And the upside of when you draw an all blue hand or a very heavily blue hand and you have access to this blue Pummel is very high.
That's fair. And then I guess the other notable thing is that there is a copy of Final Spring Tunic alongside the Steel Braid Buckler and the Titan's Fist. No Rampart in Ben's list, but I think maybe this other secret was that tectonic plating was also keeping Bravo down this whole time as well, where I said this as much in my deck tech, but it's also my thought process. around building Bravo the way I did now was one of the best plays that Bravo had, or not Bravo, one of the best plays that Oldtime had was just the pitch a blue command and conquer one resource floating with tunic up for your pummel. Like that interaction is just so clean and just can just swing so much agency and tempo away from your opponent by itself that like I couldn't imagine playing a guardian style disruptive like attack deck without having access to like that setup. It's just so important to like swing tempo in certain situations or really disrupt your opponent on meaningful turn cycles, especially against Lexi. And tectonic plating kind of sucks. I think tectonic plating kind of sucks, which it's sad to say because I was a tectonic plating defender for a long time, but I think it deserves its $30 price tag at this point.
Yeah, and I think with the Tunic CNC pummel interaction, the math just on that turn is so good for you. You're spending 3 cards, a blue pitch card, the CNC, and the pummel, and you're dealing 10 damage or presenting 10 damage, and you're also stripping multiple cards from your opponent. Assuming 1 for the CNC and 1 for the pummel, you're getting 2 cards back. So essentially, you're net spending 1 card for 10 points of damage, which is just a huge value swing. Your opponent can't ignore it. They're going to lose their arsenal. They're going to lose a card from their hand, and they're taking 10 damage. So it's just insane just on the value side of things. And also your opponent has to respect, or they, no, respect's not the right word. It's going to alter what they can do.
Yeah, and the other awkward thing about tectonic plating is since you're paying that resource up front, you don't know that you'll need that seismic surge token on the next turn cycle. There's going to be lots of instances where you're activating tech plating and you're just spewing that resource where either your opponent's presenting something really disruptive and then you're one on the back foot that needs to block, or your hand was perfectly functional on that turn cycle anyways and you didn't even need the extra resource. But Tunic kind of allows you that modularity where if you want that extra resource, you know you're going to have access to it. So you can still do things like use Tunic resource, pitch 2 blues, come in with a crippling crush or a starstruck. I think the one card that it doesn't play as cleanly with is Spinal Crush, but there weren't very many hands that Spinal Crush was playable. Like all the hands that tech plating made Spinal Crush playable with the extra seismic surge. It's going to be the exact same thing with the tuning resource because it's still just the 5 cost with the extra 1 resource because it still puts it at that awkward 4 break point.
Yeah. Though it does give you both it and the seismic surge give you the ability to dominate it and play it. If your opponent doesn't have very much armor, that can be quite good.
Yeah, but the tunic can still also once again be used to dominate the attack as well. So I mean, but you can't use tech plating. You can't use a seismic surge token to reduce the cost of your CNC or pummel.
So the last advantage of Tunic over Tectonic Plating is Tunic works well with the generic cards. Cards like Zealous Belting and Command and Conquer can be really awkward if you draw a hand with multiple reds in these cards, but with Tunic, you can just use Tunic to lower the cost of it. So if you need to pitch a red and use Tunic counter to play a Zealous Belting or a Command and Conquer, you can do that. Whereas Tectonic Plating only works on Guardian attacks. The seismic surges that you create don't reduce generic attacks. And Bravo does play a decent amount of generic attacks with 6 red ones. 8, I guess, counting Lightning Strike, but Tunic doesn't help with that either. It just takes 1 extra card. But yeah.
Yeah. Cut your tech plating. Let go of the past. Move on to the future in the new Findall's Spring Tunic ways. It's a good card. Good piece of equipment. Who knew? Any final Bravo thoughts there, buddy?
Nope. That's it.
You want to talk about some Levia? We talked about my deck. You want to talk about your Levia experiences and compare your Levia deck to this Pat Eggsy Levia deck?
Yeah. So Pat Eschke took Levia to a top 8 finish at the Battle Hardened. His Levia deck was very, very different from mine, where he's playing Claws, Blood Rush Bellow, and not playing very much of the recursion package. No copies of Ghostly Visit, just 1 Howl from Beyond and 1 Deep Rooted Evil as cards that he can play for Banish. And then, of course, when you flip into Plasma Fet Levia Consumed, you can play all your Blood Deck cards from Banish. But until then, just the Howl from Beyond and the Deep Rooted Evil. And I think this approach is definitely a different direction than where I went. potentially is better, definitely into the faster matchups where you're just looking to race with Blood Rush Bellow and turn into Levia consumed pretty quickly. Or, yeah, Plasma Threat Levia consumed. There's a lot of other things that are reasonably different from my list. 3 copies of Beast Within, of course, combo well with the Blood Rush Bellow. And that card's also just like actually lines up really well into the Lexis of the metagame. When they codex you and you discard Beast Within, you're just like not losing as much value as you would be if you were discarding any other card. Same thing for the Winner's Bites that we see a lot of copies of in these Lexi decks. If they Winner's Bite you and you discard a Blood or a Beast Within, you might take 1 or 2 damage, but you're not losing a full card. You're getting your card back. Sometimes you'll take even more than that, but your average damage taken from discarding a Beast Within is somewhere around like 1.8 or something. So trading 1.8 for a card, pretty good deal.
Okay. Sorry, once again, I don't have a lot to say about Levia. So I'm looking to you to carry the Levia discussion again. Because
Okay.
I don't even know like what's interesting about this deck. I guess there's the Guardian of the Shadow Realm. That's a card that you were playing around with a little bit. Do you have any thoughts about that card? Because I've always liked that card. That card always seems sweet to me.
Yeah, I ended up on 1 copy of the card. I don't think it's particularly good. I would not be surprised to if it doesn't keep having a place in Levia lists. It's really mostly there for Azalea, and Azalea did not put up results this weekend, and I don't think there's really a way to make your Azalea decks resilient to Warmonger's Diplomacy, which is a card I expect to see a lot in the future. um, Other things, there's 24 blues in this list, I think. 24 or 23. I played 23. I played 3 Warmongers Diplomacy. This list is not playing any. I don't know if that is something they would change going back, but yeah. And then I guess the other big things is playing the rest of this discard package. There's 3 Savage Feast, 3 Pulping, other cards that just discard random cards that you see a lot in Reinhardt decks, but I ultimately decided there wasn't room in my Levia deck because you needed to be turning off Blood Debt so often because you were trying to recur ghostly visits and stuff. And yeah, and with my version of the deck. So I think this is an interesting build. I would like to try to get some games with it. I definitely don't love playing 0 copies of Ghostly Visit, 0 copies of Void Wraith. I think those cards are quite good. And also, when you're adding those cards, you need the non-attack action that banishes 3 random cards and gives +2, +3, or +4 to your next attack. Though, I guess not playing that makes you a lot more resilient to Warmonger's Diplomacy and to your own Warmonger's Diplomacies, because if you're playing it and then you draw a hand with multiple of those pump spells, that can be pretty awkward. But yeah, Levia is good. I don't think either me or them had the optimal build figured out yet. I think their build looks probably a lot cleaner than mine, but I think there's still a lot of work to be done, and I think Levia is good.
That's fair. Maybe Blood Rush Bellow is a good brute card to include in your deck.
Yeah, maybe that's one that should make the cut.
Maybe. There might be something there.
You have to play claws to make it worthwhile, but the claws aren't too bad without it, especially if you're playing other discard effects like Savage Feast and Pulping.
Yeah.
I guess last thing about Levia, I ended up 3-2 in the tournament. I think I lost a round to Sam Nando's Uzuri list, which we'll get to in a little bit. I think he just played better than me, more than like the deck was weak or anything. I just don't think I have a lot of practice against Uzuri, and he played the match very well. And I think I can go back and point to a couple mistakes I made in our game.
Let's talk about Uzuri then, because I drew against Dromai. I finished the tournament at 3-1-1 because a draw's a loss, basically. I lost to an Uzuri because I am also not super familiar with the Uzuri matchup. I took a more aggressively slanted game plan towards the Uzuri, and then basically at the end of the game, I'm at 5 life. They attack me with Leave No Witnesses. I kind of shrug my shoulders and say if they have the contract pump card, 2/3 of their deck through their first cycle, I haven't seen one, then I die, is what it is. Then they had it, and I didn't have a defense reaction. So I lost the game, but so maybe I should just play it more defensively overall, just kind of run them over threats. But Uzuri is just like a deck that's a lot like Dorinthia, where when your opponents don't have the experience and they kind of don't know what to be playing around and when, and they're not familiar with the play patterns, Dorinthia punishes you with a bunch of damage, and Uzuri punishes you with a bunch of cards that make your deck not work anymore. So,
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
you want to talk about some Uzuri cards?
Yeah, so Sam made it to the top 8 with Uzuri. Let's see. I don't actually know exactly what to point at. This is more of a very red heavy version of Uzuri with only 8 blues total and 11 yellows actually, which is more yellows than seeing more yellows than blues in a deck is definitely a different from what we're used to, but Codex of Frailty is very good. And when you're not looking to pitch for anything that costs more than 2, then it kind of makes sense to just play yellows instead, I guess. Um, Shred and Isolate are both better at yellow than blue if you're not pitching them for resources. And then Codex of Frailty and Spreading Plague, the other 2 yellows, only exist at yellow. They're just powerful majestics that you can't play at other colors.
Yeah, I think the biggest card that stands out to me, where it's just that kind of like makes me shudder a little bit, is Red Shred. Just because it's very hard to get like the full -4 value off of that card, and Shred as an attack reaction um, is just a card that's very easy to kind of get like clunked or gumped up on, because if your opponent's not blocking, then you just can't play it, and then it can kind of get stuck and not really do anything at all. So it's interesting that Red Shred is still floating around in this list. I guess when you know your opponent's playing a lot of defense reactions and looking to play a more defensive game plan, um, it obviously shines a bit more, but it still kind of has to line up in those situations, I guess.
Yeah, and we even see that Sam's playing 3 copies of the yellow and only 2 copies of the red. He's definitely prioritizing the yellow over the red, but you can only play 3 yellow shreds, and it wouldn't surprise me if he could play more than 3 yellow shreds if one or two or one or both of these red shreds became yellow shreds as well.
Yeah, for sure. And then we see once again some down and dirties looking to surprise some Dromais with some surprise poppers. I guess you can't lost in thought the arsenal, so
That
just a
is
good
true.
popper to hold on to, I guess.
Yeah, and outside of Codex of Frailty, Uzuri can play pretty well with their arsenal clogged. It's not amazing, but it's definitely something you can do. So having that instant arsenal for a couple of turns is not bad. And I think the Dromai matchup is one of Uzuri's hardest matchups. So if this down and dirty, like even if it's just for that matchup, which it wouldn't surprise me if it is only for that matchup, it's potentially the most impactful card they can play. So
Yeah. And then there's some amnesias floating around for some extra poppers and some respect in the ninja matchups. I guess it's also good against Prism though too. You can't have cards with Herald in its name if you don't got,
if you
or
have no name.
if you got no name. So
Yeah, and it's also a popper against Prism as well. So if Prism does show up, Amnesia is definitely a card that is a solid tech card for her. Though Prism did not show up this weekend, and as far as I can tell, probably won't show up for this format until we get something new to help her out.
and then there's 2 copies of Spreading Plague. That's what I have to say about Prism. Nothing. 2 copies of Spreading Plague is interesting, kind of similar to the red shreds. I imagine you're bringing those in against the decks that are looking to block a lot. I don't know what those decks are. I mean, I guess you could kind of make an argument that Bravo is still looking to block more often than not, but I think he's still okay taking a more aggressively slanted game plan. Maybe not. Like I said, I kind of need more experience in the matchup. But if people are looking to block you out a lot, Spreading Plague is definitely a good way to punish them.
Yeah, I know I got punished pretty bad by a Spreading Plague. It was like the first turn of the game, and I blocked something with 2 cards that I didn't necessarily need to block out, and I just ate 2 Blood Rot tokens for it. So, oops.
Womp womp. Only 2 copies of Surgical Extraction. Never thought I'd see the day.
Yeah, you if you don't want too many blues, then you don't. It's definitely weaker than the red threats. It is a blue. That's its upside, but being weaker
I
than
don't
the
know. It
red
just has
threats
such a
doesn't
good on
mean
hit.
yeah, it
All right.
does. But
And then rounding out the list is 2 copies of Warmonger's Diplomacy. Surprise, surprise.
yep, the card's good. Blue block 3 can be very potent to play it in the right spots. So, yeah, I think this deck is definitely leaning very aggressive. It has like Ravenous Rabble. It has Nimbleisms. And then it has 3 copies of Razor Edge to go with a lot of red stealth cards. So yeah, just a very aggressive take on Uzuri. Not really looking for that contract fatigue. It's playing 3 Leave No Witnesses and 2 Surgical Extractions. It's the only contract cards. And Leave No Witnesses is a very, very good card. 0 for 4 is a strong breakpoint. And threatening that arsenal, just requiring either a defense reaction or a 3 block plus some armor or 2 cards. Just very powerful.
Briar time.
Last but not least, we got Briar. So there were 2 copies of Briar in the top 8. Both Yanji.
I pulled up Yanji's list though.
Okay, so Yanji Lee took her to a top 4. We actually covered Yanji's top 4 match against Rhea on Manor University for this week. So if you're interested in that matchup, look forward to that. There's definitely some new stuff going on in this Briar deck. We have first the new.
Yeah, that's why I pulled up Yanji's list. I knew it was spicy.
We got the new chess piece, Dyadic Carapace, which is just getting 3 block on your chess piece, very good. And then it just includes Arcane Barrier 2 if you are against Iyslander or Kano, just getting easy access to that extra Arcane Barrier. And then you have that extra block in the Lexi matchup. And I'm sure there's several other matchups you want it, probably against Bravo and Azalea as well. And I'm sure there's other spots too.
Yeah.
There's also 3 copies of the new Mischievous Meeps. This is 1 cost for 2 power go again. If it hits, you steal an item, and if you cannot, then you draw a card. The Kyloria text. This is not a card I expected to see any play.
Yeah. Really?
Yeah, just 1 for 2 go again. With it does have an on hit, but man, that's not a good rate.
A very threatening on hit. A very, very, very threatening on hit, and it's one of the best cards you can play after a Channel Mount Heroic, right?
It is solid with a Channel Mount Heroic in play. That is when it's good.
Sure. But I guess if you look at all of like Flesh and Blood cards printed, and especially at generic, I think there are it's Give and Take, Mischievous Meeps, and Ravenous Rabble. Oh, and Brandish that have unconditional go again.
Mm-hmm.
On its text box. Everything else has some kind of condition for it or some requirement you need to meet. Mm-hmm. So from that perspective, Mischievous Meeps,
I guess Enlightened Strike kind of falls in that category.
Meets that bar. Sure. I mean, that's not unconditional. That has a condition of putting the card from your hand and choosing that mode. But I guess like if you're playing the card, then yeah, it is something you can choose. Go ahead.
You will never be playing an Enlightened Strike and not be able to give it go again. I guess unless your opponent's. I guess that's not true. If your opponent's Spinal Crushing you or something. Sure. But pretty close to unconditional go again.
But when you compare Mischievous Meeps to something like Give and Take, especially, I think Mischievous Meeps is just better than Give and Take because I had a Briar opponent attack me with a Give and Take over the weekend, and I just was like, okay, take 3. And
yeah.
What are we doing here? And if my opponent attacked me with a Mischievous Meeps, I'm not going to be like, okay, yeah, whatever, take 2. I'm going to be like, oh shit, I have to fucking block this Mischievous. The Meeps, they're so mischievous. I got to block. I can't let these Meeps run amok all over the battlefield. I got to keep these Meeps in check. And, and that's a very powerful effect for a card to have.
Yeah, fair.
That's how being very cute. We look at the cuteness factor, the Meeps way beating down. Like Give and Take is just like, it's like not even a competition.
Yeah, I don't think Give and Take's a particularly good card either. It's also not on the list of cards I would put in my deck.
Well, there you go.
So other things, we have you mentioned this in the university video also, that we have the Nimble Strike back in the deck. So 1 for 5 go again. That's a card I can get behind. 1 for 5 go again is a great rate.
Yeah, this has always been like, it's like obviously Enchanting Melody, pet card number 1 that I'm waiting to break out and prove, and it's going to be a good card one day. But right under that has always been Nimble Strike. I think Nimble Strike is a very interesting card. As long as you're playing the Nimbleisms, and your deck wants the Nimbleism effect and can utilize it pretty happily, Nimble Strike just seems like a pretty good card to include.
Yeah, one of my favorite Reinhard draft decks was the Nimble Strike into Romping Club deck, where I was playing Nimbleism's Nimble Strike and Romping Club, and just getting to pitch a blue to play Nimble Strike into Romping Club was a 2-card 5 or 2-card 9, which is quite good. And Briar has a weapon that also swings for 4. It only costs 1 resource instead of 2, so it's probably a little better than Romping Club, but it's good. It's strong combination.
For sure. I think the wildest card, the card that I was like, what is happening here when I saw it, is Flex.
Oh,
Flex
that's okay. Go on. Sorry.
That's not going to be your what is happening card. I'm excited to hear what your what is happening card, but like Flex is wild, right? You just like it's just a 0 for 4 that doesn't have go again. You can pay the extra resources to pump it to 6. Mm-hmm. Technically a popper, I guess, at that point too, if you want to really pay the resources for it. But like, I never thought I'd see Flex in a constructed deck.
Yeah, I think it's pretty nice that like 0 for 4s are ideally they'd have something special going on about them, but 0 for 4 is what makes up Briar's bread and butter. A lot of her turns are play 2 non-attacks, play a 0 for 4, then pitch a blue to grass plus Rosetta Thorn, and that if each of your non-attacks is worth 3, that's a pretty easy 15 value turn cycle. If instead of having a random 0 for 4, you have this Flex, instead when you pitch your blue to make your Rune Chant and Rosetta and then Rosetta Thorn, instead you pitch 2 resources into Flex, you get 1 extra point of value on that exchange, which, while is not amazing, 1 extra point of value is pretty nice. And it also serving as a popper against Dromai and Prism, I guess, but mostly against Dromai is nice, even though you do have to pay the extra 2 resources into it. It's pretty strong. And the floor of a 0 for 4 is definitely okay. We see Exude Confidence sees a decent amount of play, which is a 0 for 4 with a decent amount of upside. And Scar being another 0 for 4 with a lot of upside. Snatch being a 0 for 4 with a lot of upside. These cards are probably better than Flex, but you're already maxed out on Scars and Snatches. And actually, Yanji choosing to go with 3 Flex and only 2 Exude Confidence. So valuing the flexibility of Flex being a popper a little higher than Exude Confidence ability to turn off defense reactions. The card that I thought you were going to mention was these 3 copies of Aether Slash. And I had to read this card when I saw it. It says, when Aether Slash attacks, if a non-attack action card was pitched to play it, deal 1 arcane damage to any target. So I think this is just a concession to Ashwings, where you pitch a non-attack to attack for 4, and then you can ping an Ashwing for 1.
Sure.
But yeah.
I don't disagree. Or if you really want the embodiment token, it's a 1 card that has that split damage effect where if your opponent wants to completely stop the embodiment token, they have to absorb the arcane damage as well as the physical damage. So it's 2 awkward breakpoints in 1 card. So it might as well say when you attack with Aether Slash, create an embodiment or Earth token a lot of the time.
Sure, that's fair. Unless you're on.
I don't think the card's outrageous. Like, there's a lot of Runeblade cards, and they have a lot of really mopey situational arcane damage effects. As far as like the list of like effects that you could put in this slot, I think it's fine.
Yeah, fair.
Flex is just wild to me because like you have 0 for 4, block 3 arcane damage spell or Runeblade cards that you're not playing in Flex's slot. There's the like one Arcanic that when Crackle. You fuse with it deals Arcanic Crackle. Yeah, and then there's the fuse one, the lightning fuse one. It's a 0 for 4, block 3. When you fuse it with the lightning card, deal 1 arcane damage. That like I would value all those cards over Flex, but I guess what do I know?
There are only 3 lightning cards in the list, just the 3 lightning surge. So it is kind of hard to turn on that ping for 1.
That's fair. But still, we were just talking about a 0 for 4 good rate, 0 for 4 that also blocks for 3. Not a bad rate.
Yeah, that's fair. And then, of course, we see 3 of the new specialization, Anthem of Spring, just a pretty significant upgrade to Weave Earth, just strictly better. I guess you could play both if you wanted, but never... I don't think we'll ever see Weave Earth without maxed out Anthem of Spring again. And then...
Yeah, for sure.
I guess if you're Earth fusing a lot of attacks, Weave Earth is +1 above Anthem of Spring, but for the most part, Anthem of Spring is just better. And then the last blue that is interesting is there's 3 blue Captain's Calls, which is a card that we saw a long time ago in Briar, but haven't seen recently. But it's still good. It's good. See 3 copies of it here. So
Solid blue.
yep. Anything else you want to talk about, Briar?
Good deck. Solid deck. Do Briar things. Vroom vroom.
Yeah, I was surprised to see Briar do so well and Viscerai so poorly. I honestly still think Viscerai is solid, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Briar's better.
I was playing test games against Matt on his Briar list, and I cast Warmonger's Diplomacy twice against him, and it had 0 text both times, where he was just like, okay, whatever, dude. I was just attacking with these attacks anyways. Good, nice card that doesn't do anything, idiot. Whereas when you cast Warmonger's Diplomacy against Viscerai, he's like, oh, I don't really function at all anymore on like the vast majority of his turn cycles. So if Warmonger's Diplomacy is kind of like the breakout card, then like it kind of makes sense why Briar would outperform Viscerai in that sense. And even in the match we reviewed, I like Rhea cast 3 Warmonger's Diplomacy, but like I don't think they were the reason why she won that game by any stretch of the imagination. I think Yonji just kind of had awkward draws lined up in those time periods because like even on one of the Warmonger's turns, he had the 4 non-attack action hand anyways, and then the next hand was just 3 non-attack actions with 1 attack. Like regardless of Warmongers or not, like those were just really like close to unfunctional, awkward hands that just would have given her a lot of space one way or another. So I just don't think it's as impactful against Briar as people might expect, I guess.
Yeah, and Viscerai can really struggle into it where he's really looking to play a non-attack to both turn on his ability and turn on Rosetta Thorn. And he's on Spellbound Creepers instead of Snapdragon Scalers, so he also relies on non-attacks to get his extra action points.
Yeah. And like so many of his effects, like he's playing like the 9 mobs usually, and then sometimes even lead the charges to like he needs because his attacks just don't naturally have go again. He has no ways to generate the rune chance for effects like Swarming Gloom Veil or Shrill. So yeah, the Warhorn or Warmongers is very good against Viscerai in particular. So it kind of makes sense why I think he was the second most represented deck in the field overall, but really struggled overall. And I think that story will continue as long as Warmongers is around, which I think is going to be forever. So
yeah, unless it gets banned or eroded. But don't think it'll get eroded.
Or they give him some cards that just naturally have go again.
Or we could also see like hybrid cards that are like both. They can be either attack or non-attacks. I think we might have talked about this at one point, but for now, Viscerai really going to struggle into Warmonger's Diplomacy.
Amen.
All right. Anything else before we wrap it up?
I'm tapped out, buddy. I'm out of hot takes. I'm out of cold takes. I got no takes left.
Yeah. So next weekend, we've got Battleheart in Chicago. We're both skipping that one. And then the weekend after that, we'll have the first calling with the new set. And is it Birmingham?
Birmingham.
Nice. Excited to see what comes out of those and yeah. New formats are always sweet.
For sure. Well, the next time you're battling in the new format, always remember, mind your manners. Thanks for watching.